Well, a year ago, Medibank Private, even as Ed was saying, there and its customers were the subject of one of the biggest security breaches in this country's history. 9.7 million private records were stolen in a sophisticated cyber hack, then released on the dark web. Well, today the government named the hacker responsible.
Thanks to the hard work of the Australian Signals Directorate and the AFP, we have linked Russian citizen and cyber criminal Alexander Ermakov to the attack.
So who is Alexander Ermakov? Here he is there, named as a Russian cyber criminal. Well, Sky News today ascertained that Alexander Ermakov can't be linked to the Russian government or indeed its intelligence unit, the GRU. He is out and out a hacker who was in it for the money.
We know a lot about Mr Ermakov through our analysis, and what we do know is that cybercriminals trade in anonymity. It is a selling quality, and so naming and identifying with the confidence that we have from our technical analysis will most certainly do harm to Mr Ermakov's cyber business.
In undertaking these efforts, ASD has obviously worked very closely with the Australian Federal Police, but also our partners overseas. The FBI, the NSA in America, GCHQ in the UK.
Well, Alexander Ermakov apparently, as we're told, had loose ties to the Revel Group, which, among other things, attacked Apple, which prompted the US government to post a $10 million reward for the identities of the hackers. The Russian Federal Security Agency made arrests back in 2022 and said it had dismantled that organisation. But let's bring in here Corien Vermaak, who is the Director of Cybersecurity at Cisco Australia, one of the world's biggest providers of cybersecurity systems. Tell me about this, Corien, because the wake-up call for all Australian companies has got to be real after this hack, knowing that nobody is impervious to their efforts.
Absolutely, Ross. I think the sheer militia of the Medibank hack and the weaponisation of the most private data to people should have us all sit at the edge of our seat. This is now absolutely a boardroom conversation. OK, so the boardroom conversation means the boards are made up of lawyers and they're made up of accountants. They're not made up of cybersecurity experts. So how do you expect, and in your clients' eyes, how do they come up to date with this level of sophistication to ward off what is a key business risk? So it's interesting that you may mention that, because Cisco actually conducted research showing that the Australian business cohort is only at an 11% maturity to fend off these hacks. That is against a global average of 15%. Now, coming back to the question of how should they be assessing, there's a series of mature frameworks that allow organisations to mature their GRC and their audits to ultimately fend off some of these attacks. Those are always good starting points, and the board should be asking, are we doing what is reasonably expected of us? And we should be measuring ourselves against some of these frameworks, for example, the Essential 8.
OK, so the Australian government today, to its credit, has identified this person, has put them back in the shadows, they've made their money, but the reality is, that's one. There are thousands of these people who are simply going to pop up all over the place, so the threat never disappears.
No, absolutely, the threat doesn't disappear. However, this is a good stance that the Australian government has taken to make an example of one of these perpetrators. Now, I look at this as fending off against some of the opportunists. Within the cybercrime realm, we still see a series of opportunistic attacks. And a naming and shaming event like this really has the opportunity to deter some of those opportunistic attacks. Organised crimes will always be.
So the government has made a number of moves. Number one, it said that companies should not pay the hackers. So anybody who's got a ransomware attack, they must report. They cannot pay the ransoms. They've got to let the authorities take the action that they need to. But how well equipped are smaller companies to deal with this when one of these types of cybercrimes could very well lead to their ruin?
I think the good answer to this is one of the call-outs that was made as part of this announcement is the collaboration part of that. Yes, small companies aren't necessarily well equipped, but there are a few basic essential controls that they can put in place to put themselves within reasonable space when it comes to a cyber posture. But what is critically important here is that organisations collaborate, not only with public sector, like the AFP and the ASD when these hacks are discovered, but also that large organisations like ourselves with our threat hunting capability lean into these investigations and that we contribute to creating a better space where cyber criminals aren't welcome.
OK, so Medibank Private is a very large organisation. It could arguably have afforded to take the measures that it took. I know of smaller companies that actually paid the ransoms, right, who've told me openly that they paid the ransoms to make it all go away. That was the business model of the hackers, because they felt themselves they could not afford not to pay the ransom. That's the dilemma that so many companies face.
And that's a horrible dilemma in the sense that, one, the Cisco data shows in our Security Readiness Index that these hacks cost organisations in excess of $750 US. Now, that weighed off against a ransom payment really may make the ransom payment look more lucrative or more positive in that sense. However, what I want to guard against is the fact that when you pay ransom, you aren't guaranteed that your data will get released. That is a real pitfall. We see these encryption keys being scrambled and that organisations part with their money in terms of ransom and that their data still does not get decrypted.
Yeah. So this is the big issue, though. It's weighing up the balance of the money that's involved. But the one thing you said was the amount of money per incident that it actually costs a company. So for Medibank, looking at that 9.7 million customers there, it's a colossal amount of money.
It is a colossal amount of money. And if you even look at the cost that the government must have incurred over 18 months for a forensic investigation of this nature, and the collaboration that went with that through a multitude of parties that was involved, the cost to the taxpayers are equally as large.
Corien Vermaak from Cisco, many thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much, Ross.